So this obviously struck a bit of a nerve. This is kind of a hard topic to talk about, but we've gotten a lot of interest in, learning more about this. So, losing a lifelong partner who shared in life's many responsibilities, such as financing, home maintenance, cooking, social activities, obviously can leave a giant, giant void. Inevitably, most of us are going to face the reality someday of going from we to me. This month, we're going to look at what we can do to be better prepared, the resources, the actions that you can take that can help us, really, those of us that have an unexpected or expected situation that takes us from we to me. So with that said, we're going to jump into it. I've got 3 amazing panelists this month, and I'm going to ask, first of all, each of them to introduce themselves to you. So why don't we start with Rob? Rob, tell us who you are and what you do.
Good morning. Welcome. I am Rob Silverman. I own a small law firm in Walnut Creek, our Silverman Law Group, and have terrific staff members and another attorney, paralegals, and office manager, and we concentrate on estate planning. Almost all of the work we do is trusts and estates related. I do have a reasonable background in real estate and business as well, but about 90% of what we do is estate planning, trust administration, and probate. We do quite a bit of it, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. Angela?
Hi, everyone. I am Angela Wright. I am a certified financial planner. I've been practicing here in the East Bay for 20 years. Have a small practice in Alamo. My business partner, Richard Del Monte, is in the back there. I'm just so elated to see so many people in the room here. This is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. Throughout the last 2 decades, I've had so many clients walk in the door in the we to me situation. Our firm specializes in financial planning, investment management, and income strategies for retirees. So basically, we make sure you don't outlive your money. And then we have a special focus in multi-generational wealth planning, which means making sure that not only your wealth, but your family harmony last for generations. When Dayna asked me to speak, I thought, gosh, what a perfect opportunity. I have 2 fairly new clients, women in their late 60s, who are dealing with this exact situation right now. Their spouses have become incapacitated. And watching what they're going through, it's been a painful and arduous process. And kudos to them, they've really stepped up, and they're powerful women. I'm proud of them. But the more you can do in advance, the better. So thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to sharing what I've learned.
Thank you for being here, Angela. And Gerald, tell us who you are and what you do.
Excuse me, my name is Gerald Chinen, and I'm one of the pastors at Lafayette Orinda Presbyterian Church. I've been there 15 years, and I'm actually preparing to retire in the fall. And so last week when we met together on Zoom, I learned so much from our other 2 panelists, and I'm very thankful to be here. I've been in ministry for over 40 plus years, 3 of which was as a chaplain. And so I think that my part here is to offer some emotional, spiritual help. So yeah, that's me.
Well, and I'm just tickled that you're here, so thank you so much. We're going to start with Gerald and then kind of wrap up with Gerald, and then want to make sure that we leave time for your questions too, because you've got legal, financial, and spiritual advice here, free of charge. So, write down those questions, burning questions that you want to make sure you leave knowing today. Okay, so Gerald, what advice do you offer a spouse facing a loss of a partner? And is there a way to even prepare emotionally or spiritually for such a hard transition in your life?
Mm-hmm. So I'll start with the second part. I would say that any change or transition, we incur losses. It's just a natural part of change and transition. And when we lose a spouse, whether it's because of dementia, we're losing them that way, or through death, we're experiencing a great deal of loss. And I'm not so sure that there's a real way to prepare for it. And all of us are very different. Some of us are extroverts, some of us are introverts, and it's hard to predict how a person will be able to manage, these losses. But I think there are some ways in which we can prepare, or at least be engaged in all of the changes that we're experiencing. One of which is you're doing today, coming here and listening to the panelists, and these two are awesome. I just sat there on Zoom taking notes for myself, listening to them, because they have some great, wonderful, practical things to share with you. You may have heard the Hebrew word shalom, and which means peace. We think of it as peace. But there's a greater meaning to that word shalom. It actually means well-being or wholeness. And so when the Hebrew people expressed shalom to each other and offered the peace to one another, they were saying that I'm hoping for your health and well-being, all of your well-being, body, mind, and spirit. And so in experiencing loss, it's not just looking at the practical things that we have to do, but we also have to look inward, look at our spirit and look at our emotions, and to prepare that way as well. And perhaps at times that's the last thing we do. We jump into the practical and we kind of forget to work on the emotional, spiritual part of it, but you can't forget it, because that's what we are. We are body, mind, and spirit. And so if one part of it hurts, the entire being hurts. And so we have to pay attention to those parts that are hurting most, and be able to walk into them and lean into them in order to work through them. So I would say that in whatever way you can do to prepare your emotional self as well as your practical self, like as I mentioned, coming here today, you have to do it. You can't just sit on the sidelines and think that something's just going to change just because you hope for it. I think you have to be very proactive in doing it.
And I think what's the hardest of all, I think, is that when this happens, you need to do it all at the same time, right? You need to be dealing with it emotionally, spiritually, and you must attend to the practical, legal, financial, tax situation as well. And that's, I mean, to me, that's overwhelming. So, Gerald, we've all heard it's a good idea to wait a year. We're supposed to wait a magic year before we make any big decisions, right? Emotionally, start dating, remarry, move, whatever that might be. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's a good idea?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, everyone's different. At the church where I serve, it's a large church. It's about 1,800 members, and we do have a lot of seniors. And there are some who have experienced the loss of a spouse, and within a couple months, they're married again. Yeah. And a few years later, they're extremely happy. And they didn't wait a year, they jumped into it. But I think part of it is because we're different emotional beings. But I do think it's a practical thing to be able to process what you're experiencing. And however long it takes you to process what you're experiencing, it's different for everyone. But again, I think on the practical side, waiting a year is not a bad piece of advice, because you are experiencing so much emotionally. And sometimes our losses make us do things and think things that we don't ordinarily do or think. And so you have to know yourself, and know yourself well enough to know that, okay, I can do this, or maybe I need to wait on this. And one of the things I was going to wait to say at the end is being able to engage with other people who know you well. That is an important piece of the process of grieving and healing, having someone who can speak truth to you, but speak that truth to you in love And that's what's important about truthfulness, speaking from a place of love. And we have to find those people in our lives.
This is a weird question, but I'm just wondering, is there a right way to grieve? And part of that is, I know most of us just want to get over this. It's like too painful, and can this just be done with? I've seen people that go through the natural process and really address the different stages of grief. And then I've seen others that immediately their doctors medicate, right? You start taking antidepressants or whatever, and 10 years later, they're still grieving. But I'm just wondering, is there a right way to grieve? Of course, it depends, and we're all different.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, I was going through a lot of changes myself, and a very dark place emotionally for me. And so I went to see a therapist, and I still do from time to time. And there was a particular moment in the session that I was with him. He said to me, "I would say that you're clinically depressed." And I was shocked. I was shocked that he said that, but also relieved. It felt like now I had a name for what I was experiencing. And because I had a name for what I was experiencing, it helped me to get out of that darkness. And I say this because all of us will experience our grief and our sorrow in different ways. And we will also, at times, not be able to identify the grief and the sorrow. Sometimes it comes out in anger, right? I mean, we've heard, as Dayna mentioned, there are stages of grief. Well, stages are not necessarily step by step. You experience these stages at different times in your life. Sometimes you're experiencing it all at once. You never really know. But I think being able to identify where you are in the moment and identify the emotion that you're experiencing, that's really key to the healing process. And again, we all grieve different. I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but because we're so different, we all will grieve differently and we'll experiencing our sorrows differently. And some of us will take longer to get through it. But then you never really do, to be honest, especially if you've lost someone. And especially if it's someone you've loved very deeply, because loving deeply means you will experience grief very deeply. And you'll think of, like, I lost my mom. She was 91 years old, and she died 2 years ago. I think about her every day. And in fact, just a couple of nights ago, I had a dream about her, and it was weird, when I woke up thinking, why would I dream about my mom? But I think it's because that sense of loss, I still feel that sense of loss. I mean, she was such a big part of me. I went through a divorce a few years ago. I still experience that sense of loss from time to time. And so I would say human nature, we take things very deeply. And so I don't know that you ever fully escape that grief or that sorrow, but you get better at it, and you get better at coping with it.
Okay, thank you. So socially, if the spouse or partner has passed that made all the social arrangements, that really had all the friend connections, when they pass, is it common to see the surviving spouse, especially men, hate to bash on men, but maybe start to withdraw or isolate a little bit? Did you see that in your ministry?
Yeah. In Japan, they have the saying, nure ochiba, nure ochiba. And translated, it means like a wet fallen leaf. And that's what women used to say about their retiring husbands. Because if you know, in Japan, businessmen, that's their whole life. 24/7 practically, that's their whole life. And so they've not engaged in any building of friendships and relationships. And so when they retire, they want to follow their wives around. And so their wives get very tired of it. So they say, you're like a wet fallen leaf. I can't get rid of you. and so there's a part of us that we have to recognize that at some point when we experience loss, that we're going to have to change if we're that kind of person, if we're introverted and we haven't built relationships. We have to be able to acknowledge, I've got to change. I've got to step out of myself to be able to engage the world and to engage people again, because if I don't, I will die. And I don't mean that physically. I mean that in an emotional, spiritual sense. We are going to die. And I don't think anyone wants to be there. And so I think if you identify yourself as a person who's truly introverted and have a hard time making friends, there's ways in which you can get out of that and be able to, again, re-engage life and to build some friendships. And I think it's really important that you do so.
And when we're wrapping up today, we're going to talk about actions that you can take and resources that are available too. So I want to make sure that you know that we will get to that. Thank you, Gerald.
You're welcome.
We're going to jump over to Rob now and ask, now we're getting more into the kind of practicality part of it all. What are the core estate planning documents that a married couple or widower should have in place?
Thank you for that. First, let me share with you that I always learn something when I'm on panel. So what I've learned already so far is I am never going to retire, because I do not want to be a wet fallen leaf. Not going to happen. So otherwise, let's see, back to practicality, estate planning documents. Almost everybody should have 4 core documents. Most of you are probably already familiar with it. The 4 documents are, first of all, the sort of poor stepchildren of estate planning documents that are very important, but a lot of people give them short shrift, are powers of attorney for financial matters and advance healthcare directives. Many years ago, when I first started practicing, which was last century, these were called healthcare powers of attorney, but now they're, for the last 15 to 20 years, they're called advanced healthcare directives. But those 2 documents are respectively ones that are important because during your life, if you ever are unable to manage your finances and handle any kind of miscellaneous financial matters, and you've named an agent, and preferably one or more successor agents, to handle kind of carte blanche financial matters if you are unable to do so, then it just makes things very convenient, and you're putting matters in the hands of those you trust to handle things for you. Healthcare, obviously, same thing. If you become unable to articulate your wishes to a healthcare provider, that's when the healthcare directive kicks in. And the last thing you should want is somebody you don't absolutely trust and want to be making medical decisions on your behalf. So those 2 documents are relatively straightforward, and virtually everybody should have those. The other 2 documents are more focused on typically, and those are will and irrevocable living trust, sometimes referred to as a family trust or just a trust. Most people in the area, if you own a home, it's justifiable to have a revocable living trust. Just a question for you. Why should you have, what's one of the main reasons you should have a living trust as opposed to just having a will? Any hands out there? Yes. Probate. Avoiding probate. Many people come into my office and I say, what brings you here and why do you want to do a living trust? They say, Rob, we want to avoid probate. And then they'll say, I have no idea what probate is, but I know I want to avoid it. Because it's a bad word. We read and we hear about probate. Probate's a very expensive and inconvenient estate-supervised court proceeding that's necessary if you don't have your assets in a living trust. There's a lot of myths, one of which is, hey, if I have a will, I'm good. I'm not going to go through probate. If you have a will and you don't have a living trust, you're almost guaranteed to go through probate. So a trust is a vehicle that allows you to control the management of your assets, have somebody, if you can't do it, manage for you. That's the trustee. And the assets in a living trust, if you have substantially all your assets in a living trust upon your death, then you have a ticket to avoid probate, which makes it a lot less expensive and a lot more convenient to administer when you're gone.
Okay, got that? 4 documents, minimum. What is an A-B trust, Rob? And is this a good thing for a married couple to have? Or if you have one, is it a good thing to keep?
Great question, and the answer is a lawyer's favorite answer. It depends. So everybody's different, as we talked about before, but generally speaking, I will give you a little quick history lesson about estate tax. Federal estate tax applies if you die with too much in the way of assets, and that's what the federal government says is too much. That's the amount of the estate tax exemption. Then anything in excess of that exemption is subject to tax. When I first started practicing in the early 1990s, the threshold was $600,000. Today, anybody know what the exemption is? 12 million, a little over $12 million. Okay, and if you're a married couple, you can double that, right? In pre-2013 days, in order for a married couple to be entitled to two discrete exemptions, they had to do what's called an A-B trust. And that is when the first spouse dies, the assets get split into 2 different trusts. There's a lot of different names for them. You may, if I had to guess, I'd say there's a fair number of you who probably have A-B trusts, particularly if you drafted them and or last had them reviewed prior to 2013. They were helpful because the kids could then inherit from their parents and have 2 exemptions working for them and have 0 or less estate tax to pay. That's pre-2013. Starting in 2013, due to a newer feature in the law called portability, the legislators in Washington said, okay, we understand having an A-B trust it's not rocket science, but it's inconvenient to administer. After the first spouse dies, there's a lot of expense and inconvenience associated with that. A lot of people do that because it's worth it to get 2 estate tax exemptions. However, post-2013, due to this feature called portability, the reality is that you now can keep your assets in a one-pot trust, and that is when the first spouse dies, pretty much the survivor, there's some administration that needs to be done, but the survivor just carries on and does what the couple was doing, and everything is all within the access and control of the surviving spouse, very clean, convenient, inexpensive to administer, and yet you can also get 2 exemptions. So now, post-2013, you can have your cake and eat it too, and for most people, it's worthwhile to restructure if you're a married couple and you have an A-B trust. For most people, it's worthwhile to restructure that into a simpler, what we call one-pot trust. It'll just be a lot less cost and inconvenience to the surviving spouse.
I'm going to combine 2 questions
Please.
now and ask, when a spouse passes, should we reach out to our attorney? And then the second half of that would be, and how often do we talk to our estate planning attorney?
So I'm an attorney. I'm going to tell you, of course you should make an appointment with your attorney. Anytime. No. Kidding aside, particularly for those who have this simplified kind of streamlined one-pot trust, there are a number of spouses, surviving spouses, who say, I remember my attorney redid that and simplified things, so nothing needs to be done. Well, it's not exactly true. If you own real estate, there's some forms that need to be prepared and filed with the assessor and the recorder, and various administrative things that need to be done. So it's much simplified, but yes, the bottom line is it's still a good idea to make an appointment after your spouse dies with your estate planning attorney to just look over everything, do any kind of routine administration that's necessary. One of the big practical reasons to do that is many people only have their spouse as their agent under their power of attorney, as their primary agent under the healthcare directive, as the trustee, and they have few, if any, successors. So if nothing else, it's important to do a reality check. And if you're a widow or widower, you want to make sure that you have enough depth in who you name in these key roles. And the second part of the question is, the benchmark I tell my clients is about every 3 to 5 years, it's a good idea to make an appointment for an estate planning review, or sooner if there's any major changes in your family, your financial life, loved ones, etc.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So what is the optimal way, and I don't know if Angela wants to jump in on this too, but what's the optimal way to title real estate and bank accounts, investment accounts, and who is best to designate as beneficiaries? We had this talk last week of retirement plans, IRAs, 401ks, life insurance policies. So optimal way to hold title in accounts and real estate, and best way to designate beneficiaries.
Okay, so let's break this up into two. We're going to talk on chapter number 1 is real estate and taxable bank and investment accounts, not IRAs or 401ks or life insurance. That's chapter 2. So chapter 1 is just taxable accounts, bank and investment accounts, and real estate. And of course, business and partnership interests too, to some extent. Those, in general, should all be titled in your revocable living trust. Because if you don't, what's that bad word that we talked about that you're exposed to? The probate, right? It's not a 4-letter word, but it's a bad word. Okay, so you want to avoid probate, and the only way to do that is if you have substantially all of your assets titled in the trust. Now we're going to go to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is retirement plans and life insurance. Again, we'll hammer home, everybody is different. So this is definitely not one size fits all. It needs to be, you need to get customized advice. But very generally, and then I'll hand it over to Angela for any other comments you have. But generally, life insurance, it's a good idea to name, many people name their spouse, if you have a spouse, as the primary beneficiary. But you almost always recommend to my clients that you name your living trust as the one and only beneficiary of your life insurance. It's just easier. A lot of people don't think about that. I've talked to a lot of life insurance agents. Well, we always tell the clients to have their spouse. Well, I could give you a hypothetical, which I'm not going to go into now, where that wouldn't be the best. The cleanest and the easiest way to do it is to name your living trust. What if you and your spouse die in a common accident, and your spouse is your only beneficiary of the life insurance policy? That bad P word, probate, right? Now, you could have secondary beneficiaries, but if your plan in your living trust is solid and you have backup beneficiaries, if you and your spouse are gone, it goes to the kids or your nieces or nephews or charity or whatever it is, that's all going to work fine if the death benefit of the life insurance from the life insurance policy gets paid into your trust. All the right things are going to happen in terms of what you wanted. So that's generally what I do, what I recommend. Retirement plans, very complicated. I just not long ago attended a 1.5-hour webinar on nothing but retirement plan benefits, primary, secondary, very complicated. It was given by Natalie Choate, who's a Boston attorney, who's like the guru in the United States of retirement plans. An hour and a half just touched the surface, didn't really, and there was an 80-page document that was the material from that program. So suffice to say, it's very complicated. So I'm going to get really general, but don't rely, the advice that I'm giving you, right, I'm not representing you, and it's costing you $0, and that's how much the advice that I'm giving you now is worth, okay? So in general, the best from a personal standpoint and a tax standpoint, if you are married, almost always it's best to name your spouse as the primary beneficiary. Here, not your trust, your spouse. And there's some complicated reasons for it, but just trust me that that gives the most flexibility. There are some times when you don't want to do that. If you have a blended family, there's a second or third marriage, and you have children that are separate, and maybe you want to name your children as the beneficiaries of your retirement plan, or you want to name your second or third spouse for a part of that, and you want to name your children for a part of that. You can divide it and have 50% of your IRA or 401k going one place and the other. So, but generally speaking, if we had the sort of the Ozzie and Harriet, non-blended family with, children all common to the marriage, generally speaking, it would be you name the spouse as primary beneficiary, and as secondary or contingent or alternate, you name the kids in equal shares. Very generally, but there's so many exceptions, and again, this needs to be customized. Angela, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it all without going too far into the weeds here, but I think the main point that I would drive home is that the taxation on retirement accounts is really different depending on who you name. And that's the big reason to get specific advice from Rob or a financial advisor or somebody about your situation. And it's especially regarding that required minimum distribution, RMD. When your spouse inherits your IRA, they can get on their own RMD and off you go. When your kids inherit your IRA, they now, under new rules, have 10 years to take all of the money out of that IRA. And they could do it all in the beginning, all in the end. They can spread it out. It just gets extra complicated for them. And so also, if you have a retirement plan still at a company, sometimes if you don't name your spouse as the beneficiary, you need a notarized signature. So that's just kind of something to watch out for as well. I think you pretty much covered anything else, I would say, without getting too far into the weeds on that one. Get some advice.
Thank you. Wow. It's complicated. What kind of controls can I establish to protect those who will be inheriting from us if they're too immature, too young, or irresponsible, or maybe have special needs?
So another benefit besides probate avoidance of doing a living trust is control. And that control can take many different applications. One is control for a spouse. Maybe if you die before your spouse, and particularly if it's a blended family, you want to provide in some manner for your spouse, but you really also, you need to reconcile and balance that with your desire to provide for your own children. So a trust can provide terrific controls in that they can provide you can do an infinite number of things. Young adults, minors or young adults, you can provide that the trustee of your trust, when you're gone or when you and your spouse are gone, distributes out income and principal for the needs of the children until they reach 30, and then they get half, and when they get reach 35, they get the balance, something like that. You can have a lifetime trust. I have plenty of clients who have somewhat dysfunctional kids, or they don't trust the kids to look after themselves properly, and so we set up a lifetime trust. That's perfectly fine and appropriate in some manners. You can, again, provide for distribution. You can, if you want to preserve the principal for somebody downstream, you can provide income only for your beneficiaries or certain beneficiaries. You can provide income and principal for needs. Health, education, maintenance, and support. We call that ascertainable standard. You can have a broad standard. Health, comfort, and happiness. That's a broad standard. There are all sorts of different ways that you can control assets for folks, whether it be children, other loved ones, spouse, and or all of the above. One last thing on special needs. A lot of folks have one or more beneficiaries who have special needs for which they receive government benefits, like SSI and or Medi-Cal. So if you have a beneficiary who inherits from you directly, it's going to, in the vast number of circumstances, it's going to jeopardize that beneficiary's public benefits. So the way we get around that is we set up a special needs trust, which basically is a fund to pay out the special needs beneficiary for whatever is supplemental to the government benefits they receive. That doesn't replace the government benefits, but is supplemental above and beyond what they're getting for public benefits. It's very technical. It has to be drafted well, but if it is drafted well and you have a special needs trust, then again, one of my favorite sayings, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can provide fairly robustly for that special needs beneficiary, but you won't be jeopardizing their public benefits by paying it outright to them.
Nice. I'm going to skip to a different question and just really mess you up here and ask, what is what did we call it? What is a digital estate?
A digital estate or digital assets, that's becoming a much bigger deal. Basically, digital assets are, online applications, your online banking, your social media. Some of you may be on Facebook, or those who are really cool, unlike me, might be on Instagram. My wife is, but I'm not. The social media, online banking, any kind of digital applications where you have usernames and passwords and so forth. Not to mention, I don't imagine a huge portion of you are into cryptocurrency, but this is a digital asset as well, and this is going to be a big deal, not for me, but for lots of people. So in any event, the long and short of it is that it's important for you as a practical matter to make sure your loved ones know whether it's in a safe deposit box or a safe at your home or in your special file cabinet, to have these different applications and usernames and passwords and so forth, so there is some reasonable access. But beyond that, particularly in the last 2 to 4 years, the estate planners who have up-to-date, sophisticated estate planning software, we have digital asset provisions in all. We don't in the healthcare directive because that's not a financial document, but in our wills, our powers of attorney, and in our trusts, we have digital asset provisions. Why is that important? And I know some of you are saying, you know what, I don't really have a lot of digital assets, but I would bet every one of you, or almost every one of you, has something in digital assets. It's oftentimes people are forced to go to court if they don't have the right digital asset provisions in their estate planning documents, because these services, these online services, have these terms of service, and they may or may not allow a successor, even if you've named a successor in your successor trustee in your document or an agent under your power of attorney, you become incapacitated. That doesn't mean the service provider will allow your designated person access and control and management of those digital assets. But newer software allows that, so oftentimes it helps avoid a lawsuit to try to get somebody, a successor, to be able to access and control and manage those digital assets.
Can I jump in? Lest you think you don't have any, think about like your iCloud photo accounts or your video library that you have, or your Amazon Prime account. Yep. And there are ways that you can, people change their passwords all the time. You have to in many of these things. And there are these digital password managers that you can use where your spouse needs to know one password, which you keep in the safe and you keep updated. And RoboForm or LastPass are really, really good examples.
No, we forgot ours.
You forgot your password? Oh, no. Well, so the account holder can reach out to support and get that fixed. The spouse or, the widower, maybe not. But that is a way you can keep all of your passwords. It'll ask you to update every time you change your password. It's kind of a practical way to get that going.
It's supposed to work that way.
Well, even your phone password. Unfortunately, I'll tell a story of this poor widow. Her husband passed away unexpectedly, and she's in the hospital, and she knows that he's got these digital investing accounts on his phone. Acorns and Robinhood. You might have heard of these. They don't have a physical office. You can't find their customer support phone number on Google. And so she knew she had to get into his phone but didn't know the password. So the poor woman had to grab her deceased husband's hand and use the fingerprint biometric to break into his phone. And luckily it worked, but you may find yourself in that sort of situation. So, privacy be darned, share that, even your phone passwords with each other.
Plan ahead, plan ahead, plan ahead. So, Rob, will the surviving spouse be responsible for the other's medical bills?
So this is a bit of a complicated question because the whole, managed care and who's, are you responsible for these bills ultimately? And it's beyond, frankly, my area of expertise. But again, at the 30,000 foot level, if you're married and you're incurring a debt and it's a community debt, then yes, your spouse is responsible. That is to the extent that it's a valid debt, and sometimes these debts are not valid. You might even need an expert in the whole medical arena to, if there are large medical bills, some can be negotiated and so forth. But at the higher level, if you are married and you are just entering into a sort of a typical loan transaction, then yes, your spouses, both spouses are responsible, jointly and severally, meaning whoever's assets are available are going to be responsible. There are separate property debts. If you own a property that is separate property, you brought it into the marriage and kept it separate, or you inherited it, just you, during the marriage, and you incur a debt as to that separate property asset, then that is a separate debt, and your spouse, the non-owner spouse, is not responsible for that debt. But that's not going to be the case with the vast majority of medical bills. It's a community property debt, so both spouses are liable.
Pretty straightforward. And that leads to this last question, which I think we talked about last week, because I experienced this situation where, two spouses, right? They both had previous marriages. They came to the marriage each owning their own home. And in one case, the wife moved in with the husband, sold her home, but the home they were now living in as a married couple was still just in his name. And he passed, and something to do with the way the trust had been written, she had 6 months to get out of the house. Does this really happen, and how do we avoid that?
This really happens, and sometimes it really happens because that's what the folks want. There are plenty of clients I've done plans for with both spouses, almost always a second marriage situation, where both spouses totally understand, hey, I don't have a free ride. Now, there's many other things you could do. That sometimes the owning spouse says, look, if I die first, I want my spouse to be able to have a life estate. So that's very different than what we're talking about. That's fairly common too. Hey, I don't want to ever kick my spouse out, but I also don't want it to be inherited by my spouse, and then it goes to the maid or the whoever or my spouse's kids. I want it to go at the end of the line to my kids. So you give a life estate. So that's one of many ways to handle it. But it's not that uncommon. 6 months is a little on the short side, but I have plans where clients say, yeah, that's fine. And a lot of times the non-owner spouse says, that's okay, 6 months will give me enough time to get settled and move out and do my own thing. And oftentimes it's a year, 2, 3 years, 5 years. So it's what clients want, but giving the surviving spouse fundamentally a right of occupancy for a certain period of time is not hugely unusual.
Interesting. I think in this case that I know of, it was an oversight. He didn't mean to have left it just in his name, right? And then so here she's grieving his loss and has 6 months to find another place to live, and it was just a big fat mess.
So there's a couple of just quick comments on that. A lot of times people think their asset is a separate property asset, like a piece of property, or they think it's community, and it's not. And the laws of community property and separate property are, on the surface, pretty simple. But like a lot of things, when you dig down, they're very complicated. So the first thing that the surviving spouse should really get advice about would be, is this really a separate property asset, or do I have some kind of community property or reimbursement rights? So that's a big question. But let's go back to, if it was an oversight, that's just unfortunately poor planning. It might be the attorney's fault, it might be the client's fault, it might be kind of a combination, but that kind of thing can be avoided with good planning if it was an oversight.
And that's why you say every 3 to 5 years, or when a big life event has happened.
Right.
So we already know what to do, right? All right, we're going to switch over to Miss Angela here. What challenges are you seeing in your practice regarding this topic, right, of we to me, or when one spouse is severely ill, loses capacity, or passes?
I think one of the biggest challenges is that people don't want to talk about this before it happens. I mean, really, who wants to sit around the dinner table tonight and talk about, well, honey, when I die, when I become incapacitated? Like, no, I don't want to deal with that. And I think, there are other reasons why spouses don't want to have this conversation with each other that, you might even be able to speak to a little bit. Sometimes people they've siloed. This is a necessity of life. I'll make the money, you pay the bills, you'll cook dinner, I'll mow the lawn, right? We each get our job and we get good at it and then we go for it. And we don't take the time to teach each other. And sometimes it's time. Sometimes there's shame around the way somebody has been doing a certain job. Potentially the person responsible for the finances has gotten the family in debt and they don't want to tell their spouse out of fear. Or maybe they're, I don't really know what I'm doing with all of this online bill pay stuff. How am I supposed to teach my husband how to do it? So there's just so many things. Control is another one. I'm the one who pays the bills, and I don't want him tinkering around in this, or, I don't want her in the kitchen. I've cooked dinner every night for 30 years. I'm not going to teach her how to cook, right? There's just all of these personal reasons that we have not to deal with it. But, I've now witnessed so many grieving widows and widowers in my office who in the moment now with, you said we change when we're grieving. You've got all of this stuff going on in your mind, and now suddenly you have to learn how to be a financial planner or a chef, or in the case of incapacity, a nurse. Now I'm learning about a disease I've never heard of, and I have to figure out what a power of attorney is because we forgot to deal with that, and I need to sign 72 forms every time I want to take money out of this bank account. Just so many reasons to do it in advance. Let's see, what else? Oh, people often make decisions that they regret in haste. Right, so I've got one woman whose husband has Alzheimer's. He's now moved to a foster care home, and she says, I can't stand to be in this home anymore. It's so empty without him. I got to get rid of it. And within 2 months of him moving, she sold the home and moved. And now she's having big regrets about that. And so these are the things that people, to look out for, and the big challenges that we face in having these conversations and dealing with it. And I think especially around the finances, if, money's tricky. We were all taught it's impolite to talk about money, even with our own spouse sometimes. And so if you can use somebody you trust to facilitate the conversation, your lawyer, your financial advisor, your pastor, or trusted member of your community, I highly encourage you to take that opportunity to do so.
Awesome. And we were talking last week about exactly not knowing the specifics of who has what, and we got into the example of the pension, right? The pension is lost, or you signed up for half the pay. Talk about that.
Yeah, so when you lose one spouse, your income is going to change. And having a deep understanding of every source of income you have and what will happen when one person passes away. So I've seen a case where a spouse signed up for a single life annuity for their pension. They thought this money would go on forever. Well, surprise, when he passed away, suddenly that annuity ended and she was left without the pension. So you really want to understand how your annuity payments work. Is it single life? Is it joint and survivor is kind of the term that you want to look for on those. You've also got changes to your Social Security income. And a lot of people, have a disparity in that. Maybe one spouse is getting $3,000 a month, one spouse is getting $1,200 a month. And I've heard people say, well, yeah, I'll just jump onto my spouses when they pass because they have more. And that is true. You can give up your own payment in lieu of your spouse's larger payment. But when you do that, you're giving up your portion of that income. So you are receiving their higher payment, but now you've given up, let's say, for my example, $1,200 a month in income. That's significant if you were used to getting both before.
Can you do anything to change that?
Not with Social Security, no. So that's where advanced planning, understanding the income streams with your financial advisor and how things are going to change when one or the other passes. And many advisors will do a plan for you. Okay, here's what you're getting for Social Security and your pensions, and then that's it. But having plans for these contingencies, okay, this is hard to talk about, but you're dead in this situation. Here's where all of your income is going to come from. And sometimes you have income properties. Many of us have a residential rental that we have, and one spouse has been managing that, and suddenly you've got all these decisions to make about it, and that could really impact the income if you start making renting to poor tenants or something like that. Poor being bad.
This is huge. Think about this. You're going along status quo, and your spouse passes, and you're used to a certain amount of income coming from a certain number of sources, and now it changes. So what now does your finances, what do they look like moving forward, and how do you plan ahead for that, right?
Yeah. I think also building in end-of-life care for each other. You may drain accounts. This is a client in Oregon is doing this, draining all of their accounts to pay for this foster care. And she will be left with virtually nothing when he passes away. And so planning for that. There's also really big tax changes. You start filing as a qualified widow or widower, which has similar to married filing jointly, but now you've lost an exemption for somebody. Or the amount of required minimum distribution has changed. And maybe you may have to take more in some cases than you're used to, and now you're paying more in taxes, and now you're paying more Medicare premium. So just knowing in advance where you're going to be will allow you to make decisions today with your advisor, with your attorney, to set things up so that it's a smoother ride during that transition.
And it's interesting, because we talked about this being a challenge as well in your practices, where now we're dealing with end-of-life planning. And now the surviving spouse and the adult children begin to argue. And one of the most common topics of disagreement is cremation versus burial, and what did mom want, right? And so you deal with that all the time.
Yeah, of course. And I think the more that you can put in your estate planning documents and in your wishes, the better. Get really specific. Here's where I want my service to be held. I want it to be a celebration, or I want it to be somber. It's so morbid to think about this, but it's really helpful to the people that you leave behind when you're very, very specific about, I want an oak casket and I want to be buried here. If you could buy the burial plot in advance, even better. A lot of people forget about the physical items in their household. I guarantee you, your children haven't forgotten about that antique tea set, and they both want it. And so, I know families who go around and they put a sticker with somebody's name on the bottom of everything. Or my grandmother went through and she wrote a little note to us on the really special jewelry, and it made it so much easier. And I'll tell you, my grandma went through all of that. There was one item that she didn't, an old, an antique secretary. My dad still doesn't talk to his brother 20 years later over that antique, the one thing she didn't put a note on. So just the more specific that you can be, the better. And this is the age-old tale of everybody fighting about everything when you're gone. And especially where your inheritance, the monetary stuff comes into play, people just get, in their grief, they get weird. And you cannot count on your children who, my kids get along great, it's not gonna be a problem. They get along great now while you're alive and you're guiding them, and they want to, do right by you and show you that they're good kids. Once you pass, I'm sure they're great, but you also don't know how they're going to behave towards each other. So being really specific. One of the best things that we've learned in our practice that you can do is have a conversation in advance about all of this. As awful and uncomfortable as that may seem, to sit your children and grandchildren down and say, okay, kids, here's what's going to happen. And you may have to field some really difficult questions, but they're more likely to accept it over the time that they have to understand your thinking than they will if they're surprised by it upon your death. And so I would say, do them that favor. You've built this financial legacy for them. Why not give them this harmony legacy as well and allow them to understand your wishes, to feel loved, and to get along with their siblings who are now, in some cases, their business partners and things. I mean, it's just so critical that you talk about it. And there are outfits that can help you if you feel scared about doing that, your attorney, your advisor.
Really, really good advice. And again, you're throwing in the emotions, right, and the grieving in the middle of this mix of decisions that need to be made and family dynamics and it could be like the Wild West.
And if you're worried, a lot of people won't do this because they're also worried, I don't want my kids to know how much they're inheriting. I don't want to create a waiter. That's the kid who's waiting for his inheritance. And I have some specific things we can talk about after if that is your concern, but there are a lot of things that you can do to help your child understand that they're a steward of wealth. There's all these studies where you can connect them to your history and how this wealth was made. You can teach them about philanthropy today and that this isn't their money. They're stewarding this money for a bigger family legacy. There's missions and visions that you can have around the wealth, which sounds so woo-woo, but it really does work to help people. It becomes bigger than themselves and their own spending needs. And it will help to get rid of that waiter.
Yeah. Well,
issue.
Gerald would add that that's biblical too. Right? We don't own any of this. So here's another bad surprise that could happen. One spouse says to the other, "Oh, honey, don't worry. I've got a life insurance policy. You'll be taken care of." And then spouse finds out after honey passes, it was only $25,000. And she was thinking, they never talked about it. So she was thinking, it's got to be $500,000 or something, to get us by.
I mean, that's barely enough for a burial.
Well, exactly.
So, trust but verify. And this again goes back to sometimes the spouse is ashamed they didn't buy more life insurance and now it's too late. But in the end, you have to have the conversation and you have to just know what you're working with. And if you are the spouse who's faced with one that won't tell you, it's, honey, whatever it is, it's okay. I just want to know what I'm going to need to do when the time comes. Please help me figure this out.
Right. So another thing that came up in one of my recent conversations was when is it too early to alert your financial institutions, i.e. your bank? So, a lot of us have automatic payments, right? Auto pay. Some of them are monthly, some of them are quarterly. And so do you call your bank right away the week after your spouse passes and tell them that the account that's in husband's name, that he's passed, and now what could possibly happen, right? So
yes, it is very common for a financial institution to do something called restrict an account when somebody passes away, especially if it was not a joint account or community property or held in the trust. And they will stop auto pay. Or in my world, Charles Schwab will stop us from trading or making distributions on a deceased person's account. Sometimes it takes time to get your paperwork in order. And so while you are supposed to alert the institutions, practically we tell our clients, wait until you have all of the paperwork necessary to transfer that account into your name. Sometimes it's if it's an IRA and you're the beneficiary, you send the death certificate off, an application in your name, 1 week, you're good to go. In other cases where maybe there wasn't good estate planning and you're in a probate battle or something like that, what if you had an investment account that was invested in the stock market and you passed away on January 31st of this year and your advisor couldn't make any trades in it? Yeah, you maybe lost 20, 30% of your account simply because it had to sit there and you couldn't do anything about it. So practically wait until you have all of your documents in order before you start alerting institutions.
That's good advice. And another thing is both of you, I urge you, both of you sit down and meet with your local advisor, your attorney, your CPA, your financial advisor, because what has happened recently is one spouse dealt with all of the legal financial things, and he knew personally the attorney, let's say. The wife could have cared less. No, that's your job, honey. I'll run the social and I'll run the house. And so she finally had to meet with the attorney. She didn't even like the guy, because they weren't working with the attorney together. So it is something that it's not a fun meeting, but you really do both need to get involved and at least meet them, so you're comfortable if that's who you're going to be dealing with moving forward after the fact. So now we're going to circle back to Gerald. And we're just going to talk, before we open it up to Q&A, a couple things about, do you talk about funeral memorial arrangements? Do you discuss those kinds of things with people facing a loss? And then the second part would be Stephen's ministry.
Okay. Yes, we do talk with folks about planning memorials, and I've done a couple of workshops at the church in preparing for your own memorial. And we usually talk about what they want to have in their memorial services. And as Angela said, even in this, it's really important to be specific, because I've met a lot of families whose mom or dad has passed, and they have no idea what the mom and dad would have wanted in a service. And they struggle through it. A lot of people struggle through it. And especially if you have competing siblings, that can be a challenge, sitting there with siblings who don't agree on anything. And so if you have a place that where you want to have a memorial service, it's a good thing, I think, to speak to the pastor there or wherever it might be about what you might want. And I actually have a form that people can fill out, and they can be very specific about songs they want or scripture passages. I even ask them, who would you like to speak at your service? I was pastoring a small church in San Mateo many years ago, and there was a man in the community who spoke at every single service, practically. It was sort of an obligation that the families felt in this community. They had to have this person speak. And almost always, he only spoke about golf, the relationship to golf that the person had. And I heard his story, and his stories about each person was very similar. Anyway, to say that it's important that you even consider who do you want to have speaking at your service. It may be from different parts of your life, but again, I think planning it out is helpful to your family. Dayna just asked, what is Stephen ministry? So before I talk about that, let me just say this. You'll notice that I kind of like different words from different language groups. So in the Greek, there's a word parakletos. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And it technically means legal advocate, a legal advocate. And so here are your parakletos, your legal advocates here. But it also came to mean helper or counselor. Helper or counselor. And I bring this up to you because everybody needs help at some point in their life. Everybody. And we can pretend that we don't need to, but we all need help at some point. We all need someone to walk alongside of us. And at the church, we have a ministry called Stephen Ministry. These are lay people of the church who have been trained to do that, walk alongside folks who are going through transitions and change. And they've been through an initial 50 and one half hours of training. And they also meet in small groups every 2 weeks. And we do continuing education classes for these Stephen ministers as well. And so, for example, if you are going through a divorce and you're having a hard time with that, we pair you up with a Stephen minister, and they meet with you once a week for an hour at a time for as long as you need to meet with that person. It doesn't take the place of a professional therapist. In fact, some of the folks who are taking advantage of a Stephen minister are also seeing therapists. When I was a chaplain, they told us that you are the only person as a chaplain in the hospital, when you enter someone's room, you're not there to ask something of them or to get something out of the patient or make them do something. As the chaplain, your only job is to listen. And I think that's what a Stephen minister is trained to do, just to listen. And not to judge you, not to give you advice, but just to hear you out and just to walk alongside with you. One more story. I love stories, as you can tell. Guilt is also plays a part in how people respond to changes, right? Guilt. When I was the hospital chaplain at this hospital in Honolulu, now Honolulu is a place where you can travel to and from very easily. And so many young people would leave the islands and they make their homes here now on the mainland. We call it the mainland. A lot of them are here in California. And so let's say a mom is dying in the hospital. So son comes home from California to be part of the process, to be there for the dying parent. But they feel so guilty that they haven't been there in helping the other siblings who have been there. And they're trying to make decisions that the siblings already have made because they've been there with the parent. And they get into tremendous conflict because of what the guilt that the sibling from the mainland is feeling. And it's very troubling because you, as the sibling who's been there with the parent and you've already talked to them and made decisions with them, not necessarily just for them, but you making it with them. The one who comes from California has no idea and has no interest in hearing what these decisions were made with the parent because they feel so much guilt. And so it's important, I think Angela said it best, that you have to talk about these things. And there's a wonderful book that I read years ago called Fierce Conversations. It's about having these meaningful, truthful conversations before you have to make a decision. And it's an important step in the process of our grieving and our dealing with transitions, having meaningful conversations.
We'll list some books for you in the follow-up email, because we've got some other books to recommend as well. Okay, I have one last question before I give a little advice, and then we open it up to some questions. So when my spouse has passed and I'm interested in dating again, how do I help my adult children be ready for me to start dating again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm ready, but they're not ready.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, my husband's just fine. I'm just, just saying.
Yeah, I asked Dayna to ask me this question because this has happened. I think it goes back to the nature of the relationship a parent has with their child. If they've been open about many things, then this conversation can take place very easily. And I think the children would want the parent to be happy. But if an adult child hasn't had a lot of conversations with the surviving spouse, then the conversation is much more difficult. So the truth is the parent has to talk to the child to prepare them for the inevitability of the parent actually going out on dates with someone other than their mother or their father. But as the parent who is ready to date, I think you have to be prepared for some emotional battles because many adult children just can't deal with it. They're the ones too that need to have some real help and some real conversations with professionals to deal with their feelings. And unless they are willing, children are willing to engage with a professional or a friend to talk about what they're experiencing, it's going to be a struggle all the way through. But as long as you, the parent, who are the one who's ready to date, as long as you can be open about it and continue to talk with the person, with your children, that's a key. That's a key part of the process for your child, because eventually you may end up marrying this person, and you really would like the blessing of your children. And so remaining open and honest about what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, that's really key.
All right, I've got a couple ideas you could chew on. So someone brought this up. This is not my original idea, but swap roles with your spouse. Swap roles. All right, so he's been handling all the finances. So guess what you're going to do now for the next, I don't know how many months. You're going to start handling the finances. So you know where the passwords and the logins and the accounts live and which institutions and who you call. And maybe he needs to start, I'm just generalizing, maybe he needs to start doing the cooking. He doesn't. My great uncle did not know how to boil water. Swear to gosh. My great aunt passed away. He didn't even know how to turn the stove on. I am not kidding. So kind of think about that. I think that could be good. So one has been paying the bills or one's been, just switch. And create an operations manual. If you've been in business, your company's had an operations manual. Well, create one for the home. So one wife that we dealt with had never been interested in their RV. It was in the driveway. They were actually about ready to go on a trip, and the husband suddenly passed away. She didn't even know where the key was. They had to go re-key the darn thing to even move it to get it out of the driveway. So, where's the key to the shed? Where's the key to the safe? What's the combination to the safe? We have a safe. I don't even know the combination. I mean, for real. So I got to ask my husband, where the heck is the combination for the safe?
Other thing, how do you change the HVAC filter? That has to happen every 6 months.
I know how to do that.
I recently went from a we to a me, and I didn't know how to do that.
I know how to do it. How does your alarm system work? How does your sprinkler system work? An operations manual. And, of course, the obvious. Where's the trust? Where's the will? The obvious things. So we are ready for Q&A. We are ready. We are ready for your questions. So if you haven't filled out your evaluation, do so now. And we've got some time for some questions. You've got some wonderful expertise here. Who has a question? I can always count on you, Marianne.
Angela, thank you. Are you a fiduciary?
Yes, Del Monte Group is a fiduciary, which means that we are registered with the SEC to give advice, certified financial planners, and fiduciary means we have to put your best interests first. Not all investment managers are fiduciaries, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, realtors are fiduciaries, but real estate agents are not. Interesting. Question? Questions? Really? Okay.
Thank you. How do you know when you need both a certified financial planner and a tax CPA or an attorney?
How do you know when you need both a certified financial planner and a CPA or tax attorney? Good question. They're two really different things. And I would say when you're at the point for the tax piece, certified tax preparer, when you can't file your own taxes anymore. So things have gotten complicated, or you don't want to file your taxes anymore. And I would certainly look for a CPA to do that. Those are people who can advocate on your behalf with the IRS. You may also find enrolled agents who can prepare and file a tax return for you, but won't go to bat for you with the IRS. And you'll pay somewhere, between $700 and $1,500, depending on how complicated your taxes are, to file that return. If your spouse has been doing your tax return and they're suddenly incapacitated or passed away or you've divorced, Especially in the case of a death, that next tax return, I would certainly get some help from a CPA to do it. In terms of a certified financial planner, we often come into play when you have big decisions to make about how to take a pension, for example, or you've got a lump sum out of your 401k. How do I make this money last the rest of my life? Or you lose income from one spouse and you have to retool some things. If one person has been managing the investments your whole life and you suddenly have to take over and you don't know the difference between a stock or a bond, getting a planner or investment manager involved would be really helpful. And I spend a lot of my time educating people. I have a whole presentation on here's the basics and what you need to know to make decisions about how to allocate your investments and when to take a distribution and things of that nature. Also, if you're arguing with your spouse about the finances, you can get a professional, just get in the room with them, everybody suddenly calms down, and they'll facilitate the conversation for you. Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? Well, yep, okay. I'll circle around there. Madame.
Yes. Hi, my name is Lynn. It's a neat idea to switch roles. However, my husband managed a lot of money for a very large firm, and every time he would be doing taxes or whatever he was doing, we passed the taxes, passed a CPA just to see if he missed anything, and he generally didn't. The CPA might have, but he didn't. And I would say, what are you doing? Or show me how to do that, or so on and so on. He'd say, go, Ellen, I'll tell you later. Well, the later never came, of course. So the CPA laughs now when I bring in taxes, sort of buried in one of those little airport roly-poly things, a lot of paper stashed in between. So if you have recommendations for anyone who wants to do this and the husband doesn't want to, what do you recommend?
So I think Gerald could probably also speak to when people are kind of arguing and don't want to share, but I'll say things that you can do if you really are at a stalemate and your spouse will not share with you. Grab whatever paperwork you have and find an advisor that you trust, that you get that good gut feeling from, that's a CPA or a CFP, a fiduciary, to go through the documents and explain it to you. And you could find people who might not they won't be taking over managing those assets, but you could maybe pay them a fee for their time to walk you through all of this. And you could maybe ask the spouse to teach you, how do I interview an advisor? Like, I'm never going to be at your level. You're the king of this. So I'm not going to try to do it myself. How do I find someone I trust? Like, I have someone who said, I don't even know how to interview an advisor. What am I supposed to ask? And so, what questions would I ask? If you won't turn this over to me, how do I get help once you're gone? And sort of, playing to their strengths. Sometimes people who are in control really like to hear that they're so great. And so you're so good at this. I'm going to be so lost without you. What one or two things can you teach me now, just in case you get hit by the bus?
Yeah.
What else would you say when you've got spouses who are kind of, I don't want to share that?
Yeah.
On the spot, sorry.
Yeah, that's a challenge for sure. And but again, I think it's really important that we're honest, truthfully honest about where we are, and when we need to be able to exchange ideas. And I think that's what we want to articulate. I think that we're exchanging ideas with each other that will be helpful for both of us. And it's a challenge when someone is withholding it, and I think when we're really proud about what we've done, it's hard to let go of things. I remember being at a conference, and Rob was talking about being in a webinar once, but I was at a pastor's conference, and I was sitting next to a minister who was really renowned in the community, and he was long retired, and I saw him scribbling notes, and I thought he was bored, and so he was just writing stuff to himself. And during the break, I asked him, what were you doing? He said, I was taking notes because I find that I'm learning something new every day. And I was really impressed by that as a senior retired person, that he's still taking notes and learning from other people. And I think maybe that's the approach some of us have to take. I'm still learning can you help me with the learning?
Nice. Yeah, that's nice. And you know what? Because we always promise to get people out on time, we're going to have Rob ask Angela to pull, I'll have you go get your goodies, and Angela can pick a couple tickets.
I can ask a very quick question of Rob.
Okay, well, because, all right.
Very uncomplicated situation, couple married for many years, no divorces, nothing like that. How often should you revisit your estate plan? Because of changes?
3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years.
Right.
5 years, I heard him say there's a complicated.
Well, no, I'd say I probably wasn't clear enough. 3 to 5 years is a good benchmark no matter what, or sooner. In other words, it could be 6 months or a year, or sooner if any material changes occur in your financial or personal lives.
And if your question didn't get answered or you didn't get a chance to ask your question, jot it down on the eval, and then we'll make sure that we get an answer for you, okay?
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. As always, if you want a copy of Endless Inheritance, please go ahead and request one using the link on your screen or on our website, free to you. This is about family dynamics and transferring that wealth to your heirs. So if that's on your mind after today, definitely pick up a copy of this. If you have any questions, or topic requests, you can send them to us at info@aplaceofpossibility.com. Of course, you can always schedule a meeting to talk with one or both of us if you want some financial support. Click on the link on your screen or go to aplaceofpossibility.com.